So welcome back to another Basics of the Bible, where we're attempting to help people who may have never read the Bible, who don't even really know what the Bible is about, to be able to read it better. It is just, frankly, an important book, and it's one worth at least having some knowledge of it, if nothing else. Obviously, we think there's more to it than that, but it's a good place to start. And so in terms of reading the Bible better, one way to do that is by just actually reading it. And so I figured it would be great to just pick a starting point. There's a couple of different places that you can start. That would be great to start at. But I figure just pick one, and this will be able to give us some tools in terms of how to read the Bible better. And so for that, I thought I would pick John chapter 13 through chapter 17. And so one of the reasons why is that the Bible has really one central character and one central theme. That central character is God, and that central theme is his love and care for his people. And so we see that all throughout the Old Testament, which is the first large part of the Bible, and we see that in the New Testament. And we see that primarily, or most accurately, if you will, in Jesus Christ, God's Son, who is himself also God, comes down to earth, takes on flesh, walks among us, and that's what the four Gospels. So the beginning of the New Testament, you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so that all brings me to John chapter 13 through 17, because in this section, we have Jesus, the central character, showing his concern for his people, the central theme. And this is on the eve of his crucifixion. So if you don't know the history of the story here, is that Jesus comes into this world, he then dies and is buried, and then after 3 days he resurrects, he rises again. He's beaten death, conquered death, and then he ascends, he ascends back to his throne in heaven. And so this section here is taking place on the eve of his crucifixion, his death. The crucifixion is the manner of his death. And so that brings us to John 13, verse 1. And so primarily what I want to show here is that one of the ways in which we read the Bible that is the most profitable is to simply ask questions. So that's really what I wanted to do here with this text, is show you some places where we can ask questions and hopefully provide you with some answers or some places to find some answers. So the text before us is John chapter 3, verse 1, which you can find online. There'll be a link in the description below. So it begins, "Now before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." Well, first we can see the primary people who are in this text. Well, we have Jesus, we have the Father, and then we have this object, those whom he loved. So we've got loved, and his own who were in the world, he loved them. So again, this comes to the central character, which is God. Here we have Jesus, and then we have the object or the central theme of loving his people. Here we see how he's loved his own who were in the world. He loved them to the end. And so that just gives us, okay, that's what's happening. Kind of very simple, just simply how you look at a sentence, right? We find the important parts here. One of the other important parts we can find are these words that are repeated, right? We've got these words, loved. There's my bad little heart here. Loved. So one of the central parts of John chapter 13 through 17 is how Jesus shows his love, his care, and his concern for, right here in the text, his own, for his own, which we can discuss later. That's a good question. Well, who are his own? And especially not just me telling you who his own are, but showing you from the wider context, John's gospel, who does Jesus have in view here? That's really the question when we ask, who are these people who are being referred to as his own? And now as we look at this, there are some questions that would just arise naturally as you're reading this. The Bible is a long book, and it's an old book. But again, this just reminds us here that there's more to it. This is a common way that we talk about the chapter 13, and the verse 1. Then the last little piece here is, this is from the book called The Gospel According to John. Again, we can get into some of that more of that later, but John is one of the disciples of Jesus, one of the followers of Jesus. So John is an eyewitness. As you read the Gospel of John, you'll see sometimes the disciple whom Jesus loved. That's John speaking. It's a way in which he's writing himself because he is a part of it as a follower, as a disciple of Jesus. One of the other questions naturally that arises, especially if you've never read the Bible before, is this. There's this feast of Passover. Feast of Passover. I mean, feast is easy. This is just a time in which there is meat in abundance because there's animals that are being sacrificed, and part of the celebration is that households gather, people gather, and not only is the animal sacrificed, but then it is also cooked or functionally barbecued, and people gather and they eat it. So it's a celebration. And then the Feast of Passover. This actually would send us all the way back into the Old Testament. To a book called Exodus. So the beginning of the Bible is the book of Genesis. The second book is the book of Exodus. And the book of Exodus, its primary theme is God who comes to rescue his people who are enslaved in Egypt. And part of that process when they're rescued, the last plague, or it's like a curse that comes upon the Egyptians, is the death of the firstborn son. And for the Israelites, this is God's people in the Old Testament, for them, they were supposed to sacrifice a lamb, and the blood was then to be placed on the top of the doorpost, and God would pass over them, thus showing that they trusted, that they believed in God's word, and they were saved from that, and ultimately then God saves them and brings them out of Egypt. And to commemorate that is the Passover feast. So if you're to go back to Exodus, it's Exodus 13, Exodus 12 and 13 should be where the Passover is celebrated. And so you can read some about that if you want. But this is an important piece, this Feast of Passover, where God has this sacrifice that saves his people. This may sound now familiar. As I said, the point of the Gospel of John is leading to Jesus' death and his resurrection, where Jesus would be a sacrifice in order to save his people, or to save his own. And so that's why this becomes important, that all of this takes place on the Feast of Passover. So more, as we go through this, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world. So at the beginning, if you go back to John chapter 1, it speaks of the Word. This would be capital word because it's speaking of a proper noun. It's a name being given to Jesus. It speaks about God the Father, which we have here as well. Speaks about God the Father together before the world was created. Then the rest of John chapter 1 has Jesus, the Word, taking on flesh and coming to dwell with us, coming to live in this world, which also means then if Jesus has come into this world, there's a time in which he will depart out of this world, a time in which he will have accomplished what he set out to do, which was ultimately to be a sacrifice, to stand in the place of, to take the wrath of God that humanity deserves, in order that those who would believe, who would trust in Jesus, would find life, life in abundance and life everlasting. If you want to, you can read that in a very famous verse, John 3:16 and 17, which speaks about this. So there is a time when Jesus is going to depart out of this world. It's also interesting that John uses depart instead of die, because when we die, our souls and our bodies are separated. Bodies go into the ground or they're cremated. And then our souls ascend or descend. They go somewhere. But that's not the case with Jesus, though his soul and body are torn apart. They're put back together in a glorious resurrection where Jesus is now unable to die. He's conquered death. And you see that in the end of the Gospels. And after that, he then ascends out or leaves this world in order to sit upon his heavenly throne as he rules over creation, and there's a time in which he will come back again. So that's what John here is signifying, not that Jesus would die, but rather that Jesus would depart. He would leave this world on his own. And so that's a lot of what John 13 through 17 is about, that Jesus is going to depart, and so now he's showing his love and his care for his own people. Now, when we ask that question, who are his own people? Well, which talks about those that believe, or those that trust in Jesus, are the ones that have everlasting life. They are his people. You can also go read John chapter 6, which this long discussion will show you that there are those that the Father has given to Jesus, those whom Jesus is coming to specifically save. And finally, it speaks of those who are in the world that Jesus has special care for. So part of also what John is writing about is not just about what happened back then, but also what happens today. So Christians, those who trust and those who believe, who are still in the world. It is a place in which we face, again, our own temptation. We face our own sin, that's being disobedient to God. And we face all of these other things like sickness and death. It's difficult to live in this world. So Jesus has a special care and concern. And finally, it says here, he loved them to the end. You can also think about he loved them with the utmost, with a love that's stronger even than death. With this strong, unending love. He loves them fully. He is with them throughout their entire life. So that's a little bit of John chapter 13, verse 1. And so primarily what I want you to see is that there's so many questions to ask. It's just there's questions upon questions. Even what I've done is not covering the fullness of this verse. But if you start asking those questions, you'll start to have a better comprehension of what you're reading. This is not just exclusive to the Bible. It happens with everything, as long as you're reading with a careful attention to what the sentences are saying and in the context that they're being said in. There's 12 other chapters that deal with Jesus' life and his ministry, his work while on earth. So this is set in that context. And so once you do that, then you can ask questions and also see in the wider context how these questions are answered, such as, his own. We looked at right over here and right here, John 6, John 3, just to see more of who are his own. You can also see actually in the rest of John chapter 13 that his own include 11, what we would say, followers. Originally there's 12, but minus one, which is Judas Iscariot, the one who betrays him. He leaves after later on in John chapter 13. And so part of what it is, it's those who believe, those who Jesus is after, and those who follow. These all help us kind of understand who his own are. I hope that just gives you a brief bit or brief understanding of how to ask these questions. If reading John chapter 13, you have more questions, put them in the comments. We'll have some more information on our website as well. So there we go. Look forward to talking about this again. Well, thanks for watching that. If you'd like to find out more on basics of the Bible, you should be able to click this video here. If you want something on John's Gospel, I'd recommend these sermon series right here. And see you soon.